WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's 6 o'clock in Dakar, Banjul, Monrovia, and Accra, 7 o'clock in Abuja, Porto Novo, and Niamey. Good evening, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. Ghana's parliament mourns the passing of Akwitia MP Ernest Kumi after a sudden heart attack.
The caucus of the NPP minority has been struck by this sudden summons to our brother to the parliament above, referring to our brother Ernest Kumi of Akwitia. Speaker, we are in touch with the family.
Citizens Movement in Togo denounces the sentencing of protesters arrested during the late June nationwide demonstration, and Côte d'Ivoire's opposition mounts pressure on government to hold an inclusive presidential election.
It's important for me to be here to support my party and to show all of Côte d'Ivoire that even though we are abroad, we are participating in the expression of democracy in the country where we reside. Our concern is precisely that the president refuses to have another leader on the electoral list, and that won't please us.
Liberia hosts a national reconciliation program to honor war victims. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Christopher Aticho with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast and a warm welcome to our listeners in the sub-region and beyond. This edition of Newslink begins with some political development in Côte d'Ivoire, where the opposition continues to pressure the government to hold an inclusive presidential election after the departure of Special Envoy from the African Union and ECOWAS. 3 months before the election, the main leader of political opposition remained ineligible. New demonstrations took place over the weekend in Paris, France, and in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, calling for a free, inclusive, and transparent election. Emo Edit has the details.
In the working class of Yopougon neighborhood of Abidjan, former First Lady Simone Yvette organized a rally on behalf of our Capable Generations movement. Several hundred activists gathered to support the opposition candidate in the October 2025 presidential election. Also serving as spokesperson for the CAP Côte d'Ivoire platform, which unites opposition parties, she reiterated her call for an inclusive election. 3 months before the presidential election, the main opposition leaders, former President Laurent Gbagbo, former ministers Tijan Cham and Charles Blair Goudé, and former Speaker of Parliament Guillaume Soro, are all ineligible by court order. Moreover, in Paris, France on Saturday, the youth wing of the PDCI, Côte d'Ivoire's main opposition party, demonstrated for a democratic and inclusive election. The protesters denounced the exclusion of their declared candidate, Tijan Cham, from the electoral list.
It's important for me to be here to support my party and to show all of Côte d'Ivoire that even though we are abroad, we are participating in the expression of democracy in the country where we reside. Our concern is precisely that the president refuses to have another leader on the electoral list, and that won't please us. Not at all. Really not at all. This entire election must be inclusive, and all political party leaders must be able to run so that we can emerge from this. The winner truly represents the president of our country, which is Côte d'Ivoire.
They called on the international community, including the French government, to take a stand on the situation in Côte d'Ivoire to avoid a new post-election crisis. As the presidential election scheduled for October approaches, the political climate is increasingly tense. At the end of their good officers' mission in Abidjan, the African Union and ECOWAS pledged to support Côte d'Ivoire in ensuring a peaceful election.
A report by WADR's Abidjan correspondent Marcel Aristoble and voiced by Imo Edet. So in Côte d'Ivoire, former First Lady Simone Gbagbo has officially announced her candidacy for the presidential election scheduled for October 25, 2025. The former First Lady formalized her candidacy over the weekend in Yopougon as part of the third edition of the Freedom Festival organized by her party, the Movement of Capable Generations MGC. According to Simone Gbagbo, she believes victory is within reach. While unveiling the broader outline of her social project, Simone Gbagbo reaffirmed that her government's program is already ready. If elected, she intends to build a modern, efficient, civic-minded and transparent administration. The MGC candidate also promised to guarantee that every inhabitant of the country can live in dignity and security under the theme, the MGC, the new political proposition for the construction of a transformed Ivorian citizen. In Togo, several demonstrators who were arrested during the anti-government protest on June 26, 27 and 28 have now been sentenced. Charged with disturbing public order, the individuals appeared before the Lomé High Court over the weekend. The protest, largely driven by young people across the country, were sparked for calls from Togolese artists and influencers in the diaspora, urging President Fonya Singbe, who chairs the National Council of Ministers, to step down. Abdullah Hassan tells us more.
During the hearing, the public prosecutor requested on behalf of the company a 12-month prison sentence, including 6 months suspended for 25 of the defendants who were charged with aggravated public order disturbance under the Togolese Penal Code. Defense lawyers unanimously denounced a clear lack of tangible evidence to support the charges. They criticized the prosecution's use of detention and its arguments going so far as to challenge the alleged mitigating circumstances. After several hours of deliberation, the verdict was as follows. The court declared itself incompetent to try the case of the juvenile defendant, who will therefore be transferred to a specialized court. 12 defendants were acquitted on the grounds of doubt. 18 individuals were sentenced to 12 months imprisonment, including 12 months suspended. For the Togolese Torture Victims Association, as VITO, it is the law enforcement agencies that must answer to the courts.
What happened with this trial is ample proof that we are in a situation where justice is being exploited. And this is what we have been denouncing for several years. Because nothing justifies the imprisonment of people who demonstrated peacefully, who simply wanted to express themselves and challenge the authorities. Those who deserve to be judged today are the security forces who must answer for their actions. Those who bloodily repressed the protesters must be identified and brought before the courts to answer for their actions.
It should be noted that these calls for demonstrations were launched by young bloggers and social media activists to denounce Fonya Singbe's government.
CV Wadrago's report and presented by Abdullah Hassan. In Mali, the security threat has now shifted to the west of the country. Long spared from incursions by non-state armed groups, this border area with Mauritania and Senegal is increasingly experiencing series of attacks. In early July, several towns were targeted by simultaneous attacks by JNIM. The Al-Qaeda-affiliated movement also announced a blockade on these towns, accusing the population of collaborating with the army. Let's now join Augustin Colley for the details in this report.
An uneasy calm reigns in the town of Nioro du Sahel following last week's terroristic attacks that targeted several locations across the country. Even though life has returned to normal, the threat of another attack remains constant. The Islam and Muslim support group JNIM, which claimed responsibility for the attacks, is threatening to blockade all roads leading to this region bordering Mauritania, a situation that worries this teacher from Nioro du Sahel.
Nioro
has been living in this situation for quite a while, and as you know, the Caliphate of Nioro have been living in the pool since he was kidnapped. People have been living in fear, but we make do what we have, and we try to adapt to the current situation. When we see the difference in attack, perhaps by the genuine, we take this siege seriously, to the extent that it has proven on several occasions that it can crack down when necessary. The idea of blocking seems like a small example and is debatable.
In Kai, the main town on the western border with Senegal, which also suffered an attack, the population is displaying a completely different state of mind. Despite the persistent threat, they do not intend to give in to fear. This resident tells us,
the threat of saying it doesn't mean anything matters because the population is even more mobilized. And you know this story. People are no longer afraid. You have to experience an action first to get an idea. And we also believe normally that the state is not going to stay with its arms crossed.
Since this JNIM announcement, the Malayan authorities have not officially reacted. However, they urge the population to remain vigilant.
Augustine Colley voiced the report by WAD House Bamako correspondent Aliotiam.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Let me take you to Ghana for some development, and we begin on a sad note as Parliament earlier today, Monday, adjourned following a sudden death of Akwatia MP Ernest Kumi. According to reports, the Member of Parliament died from a heart attack. His passing comes just months after a long legal battle over his eligibility to serve as a Member of Parliament. In February 2025, the Koforidua High Court found him guilty of contempt for defying an injunction that banned him from being sworn in. A bench warrant was later issued when he failed to appear for sentencing. However, in June 2025, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction by a 4-1 decision, saying the earlier ruling was influenced by judicial bias. That decision allowed him to return fully to Parliament. The mood in the House was sober as Minority Leader Alexander Afenyo-Markin confirmed his colleague's passing.
This morning, we were informed that one of us has been summoned to the Parliament above. It's quite regrettable for me to be the carrier of this message to this august House. Speaker, the member was seen over the weekend, hale and hearty, was able to undertake his committee work, and proud to that, we all saw him at the plenary. The Speaker, this member is a young politician from the Eastern region, his first term in this chamber, who carries with him a lot of promise to contribute to the discourse of this our democratic enterprise. Speaker, it took his resilience to come to this august assembly of the people's representatives. He was determined to serve his people for the term he was elected to serve. Mr. Speaker, the caucus of the NPP minority has been struck by this sudden summons to our brother to the Parliament above, referring to our brother Ernest Kumi of Akwatia. Speaker, we are in touch with the family, and as it is customary, at the appropriate time, Parliament and its leadership shall be informed.
Ghana's Minority Leader in Parliament, Alexander Afenyo-Markin, announcing the demise of the late Member of Parliament for Akwatia, Ernest Kumi. So in Ghana, the Constitutional Review Committee has announced a revised schedule for its upcoming public engagement session in the southern zone of Ghana as part of its nationwide efforts to gather public input on the 1992 Constitution. According to the committee secretary, Dr. Rena Akomperegia, these zonal engagements are a central part of the committee's mandate to solicit the views and aspirations of Ghanaians for a revised constitution. The southern outreach follows earlier session held in northern and eastern zones including Bogatanga, Tamale, Wa, and Koforidua. The committee expressed appreciation for the public's involvement in previous meetings. Finally, from Ghana, President John Dramani Mahama has pledged justice for victims of electoral violence, revealing that the Attorney General Dominic Ayene is drafting a proposal to provide compensations for those affected. Speaking at the post-2024 election evaluation dialogue, President Mahama stated that he has requested the Inspector General of Police to expedite investigations into these acts of electoral violence and bring perpetrators to justice. He also said the Attorney General is working on a report to be presented to Cabinet for adequate compensation to be paid to victims and relatives of those affected by the violence. He condemned all acts of violence that occurred during the election period and stressed the need for accountability. President John Dramani Mahama.
Elections are by nature high-stake events. They are a contest of ideas and ideologies, often influenced by deeply held convictions and competing visions for national development. While Ghana once again demonstrated its democratic resilience in the 2024 elections, culminating in a largely peaceful transfer of power, we cannot ignore that the process was marred by isolated acts of violence in some constituencies. Let me use this platform to unequivocally condemn these acts of violence and call for swift accountability for the perpetrators. I requested that the IGP expedite investigations into these acts of electoral violence and bring the perpetrators to justice. The Attorney General is also working on a report to be presented to Cabinet for adequate compensation to be paid to victims and relatives of those affected by the violence.
Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama. You're still listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. We are also live on Facebook at WADR English Service, as well as YouTube, WADR News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Ghana's parliament mourns the passing of Akwitia MP Ernest Kumi after a sudden heart attack. Côte d'Ivoire's opposition mounts pressure on government to hold an inclusive presidential election. And citizens' movement in Togo denounces the sentencing of protesters arrested during the late June nationwide demonstration. Still ahead in the news, Liberia hosts a national reconciliation program to honor war victims. We do have the guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
To some security matters in the sub-region amid rising terrorist threats and violent extremism in West African sub-region, 5 countries have signed a historic security declaration. The National Security and Refugee Protection signed in Lome during the ministerial meeting on the matter aims to respond to the security and humanitarian challenges faced by state fighting against terrorism. The multi-party agreement was endorsed by coastal states, namely Benin, Togo, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Burkina Faso of the AES Confederation. Sankole Janko has the details.
The initiative, first launched in March 2024, is intended to respond to the growing challenges faced by signatory states currently facing an influx of displacement persons, essentially from the Sahel, due to the deteriorating security and humanitarian situation in the region. Members of the multi-party agreement are determined to protect their national territories. Out of the 5 nations of the National Security and Refugee Protection Platform, only Ghana has yet to report any terrorist attack, but hosts refugees from Burkina Faso. Adam Bona, a Ghanaian security analyst, explains the difference between the new operational platform from the Accra Initiative.
Accra Initiative failed to arrest some of the things we are seeing in the Sahel. And so mine is that there is a need for countries like us to come together because we are not perfect. You have incidents of conflict. Sometimes even nomadic herdsmen get into conflict with farmers. The spillover effect, you have innocent people running across the border. How do we deal with it? And so this is what this initiative is supposed to be doing, ensuring that measures are put in place, if not to stop alone, but to also reduce the impact should it happen.
Bon, however, says that for the 5 countries to fully implement the July 4 Lome Declaration, a number of conditions must be met.
The most cardinal element is to get the buy-in of the people. And then secondly, we need to pull resources together, bringing people together to ensure that these things are done. And so for me, what is lacking, if you ask me, is in the sub-region, a lot of things are not people-driven. But if they don't, it's not going to be successful. It's as simple as that.
Supported by the UN, the National Security and Refugee Protection Initiative is the result of 12 months of dialogue between Togo, Benin, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana and Burkina Faso. The agreement provides for the strengthening of refugee status, their empowerment through access to essential services, and the strengthening of coordination at the national and sub-regional levels.
Sankole Chanko filed the report. Let's cross over to Nigeria, where the curtain has drawn on the 2025 Nigerian Army Day celebration marked by a grand finale in the northwestern state of Kaduna. The week-long commemoration saw top government and military officials, including former head of state General Yakubu Gowon, in attendance. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, represented by Vice President Kashim Shettima, reaffirmed the government commitment to the military and urged national unity in the face of growing insecurity. From Abuja, Usman Umar reports.
The 162nd anniversary of the Nigerian Army was celebrated with a colorful military parade, display of hardware and recognition of exceptional officers in Kaduna. But beyond the pageantry, the tone was deeply reflective. Representing President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Vice President Kashim Shettima saluted the enduring sacrifices of soldiers, pledging continued investment in their welfare, equipment and training. He declared that Nigeria's response to security threats, be it terrorism, insurgency or separatist agitations, must be united and uncompromising. Shettima also paid tribute to the fallen and wounded, promising that their sacrifices will not be in vain.
Many of our pioneers have fallen in the line of duty. Some now lie in silence beneath the soil of a grateful nation. To the families left behind, I extend the deepest sympathies of a nation that shall never forget. Their memory will certainly endure for generations.
Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Olufemi Oluyede, outlined the Army's transformation goals, stating that Nigerian troops are now better equipped and more resolute in confronting threats to the country's peace and stability.
The Nigerian Army of today has been infused with modern and state-of-the-art equipment, platforms, and capabilities to confront as well as deter any threat to the country. While we may be uncertain of what the future holds, we are certain of our capabilities in the present. Therefore, we shall use the latter as a strength to prepare for the uncertainties of tomorrow.
The ceremony also witnessed a strong show of collaboration across military branches and stakeholders, underlining a whole-of-society approach to national security. As Nigeria grapples with internal and regional security challenges, the 2025 Nigerian Army Day celebration served both as a tribute to bravery and a call to collective responsibility. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
Let's shift to Liberia, where the government hosted the National Healing and Reconciliation event aimed at addressing the traumas inflicted by decades of conflict, Ebola and COVID-19 over the weekend. The gathering brought together survivors, their families and international partners, past and present leaders and various community organizations to foster peace and harmony despite the ongoing challenges. WADR's Abraham Parker in Monrovia completes the story.
President Joseph Boakai, in his opening remarks, acknowledged the suffering of victims of war, Ebola, and the COVID pandemic. He issued a state apology to all Liberians, urging the nation to let go of the past and embrace reconciliation for the collective good. The event featured a keynote address from a genocide survivor and reconciliation expert from Rwanda, Dr. Antoine Rutuyisar, who highlighted the difficulty of true reconciliation among citizens struggling to meet basic needs.
National healing and reconciliation and unity call for collective engagement. All the institutions in the country must be mobilized to respond to all the needs in the community. You cannot talk of reconciliation and unity to people who live in hunger, in poverty.
Musu Gati, a survivor who lost a hand during the 2003 Civil War, was visibly emotional during the program. She represented the view of many whose suffering to date remains unaddressed.
We never beg for a war, so let them put me in the shoes of that child or children. If I could be that child and have this victim problem, I wouldn't be at this post.
While Liberians have praised the initiative as a timely step toward national healing, a question from political and social analysts remains: how long until the World and Economic Crimes Courts deliver justice for victims? According to records, over 200,000 Liberians lost their lives during the country's civil war, while many more died during the Ebola and COVID-19 outbreaks. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
In our guest interview this evening, we head back to Liberia, where over the weekend President Joseph Boakai led the government to host a national healing and reconciliation event aimed at addressing the traumas inflicted by decades of conflict, Ebola and COVID-19. Our guest is Liberian politician or political analyst Adama Dempster, and he speaks about the initiative. He says it is long overdue.
The process of the national reconciliation and healing process that have started, I would say it's long overdue. That's one aspect, because the Civil War ended since 2003, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and the work ended in 2009, and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report had never been fully implemented in the context at which it is happening right now. So I will obviously say it has been overdue.
How might this event impact public trust in government institutions, especially given Liberia's history of conflict and crisis?
I mean, it's a difficult one, but what is obvious is that there has to be political will. And this political will, obviously coming from the president and this government, automatically will compel institutions that are responsible to implement aspect of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report.
What role do you see past and present political leaders playing in the success of long-term reconciliation efforts in Liberia?
According to the information, the government extended invitation to opposition leaders, politicians, including former presidents. But unfortunately, most of the key opposition leaders never attended, except that former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf also attended. But former President Josh Manuel Wyatt, I learned that he's out of the country, so he never attended. And then including key top opposition leaders. So in the context of national unity, these are events that we thought that opposition and politicians will come to work with the government to ensure that it is done in the interest of the country. So it is being done, it's being done holistically with inclusiveness of all other persons within the country. But unfortunately, this is not the picture we see in the process that's going on right now.
To what extent can such events translate into concrete policy reforms or perhaps institutional changes needed for sustained national healing?
So I would say in context, the rewriting of the Liberian Constitution is one policy aspect. And the issue of reparation for victims and survivors of the conflict is another policy aspect of it. And of course, overall, a truth-telling process that would guarantee genuine healing is what will cement the entire process of bringing close what happened to Liberia since the Civil War.
Adama Dempster is a Liberian political analyst. And in sports this evening, reigniting champions or reigning champions, South Africa got their 2025 Total Energy CAF Women's Cup of the Nations on a very good note after convincingly beating Ghana 2-0 in the opening of Group C. Ghana actually makes their return to the WAFCON after missing the last edition, and they struggled to match the pace and organization of their more experienced opponent. While they grew into the contest in the second half, they were useful in front of goal, or they made some wasteful in front of goal, and both Evelyn Bedu and Alice Kusi hit the crossbar. And coming up tonight also in the 2018 semi-finals, finalists Mali will take on East African side Tanzania at 7 p.m. in the ongoing Total Energies Women African Cup of Nations. And that is it for sports this evening. And with that, we've come to the end of this evening's edition of Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on wadr.org. Thank you for listening. Many thanks to Mustafa Sek and Sheikh Njai for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram at WADR News, and on Facebook at WADR English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is our health program, World Body with Imo Edit. I am Christopher Aticho. Good evening.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot